Have you ever wondered if the M4 iPad still lives up to the hype months after launch? I've been using this thing almost daily, so I have some general thoughts around overall performance as well as battery life. I've been mainly using it for productivity. However, I've traveled a couple of times, so I've used it to edit videos when I've been away from home as well. Stick around as I dive into my long-term review of the M4 iPad Pro. In my opinion, this year's iPad release was a good one. For the first time, we're getting an OLED display on an iPad. We got Apple's new M4 powerhouse silicon chip. Apple finally relocated the front-facing camera to an area that makes a lot more sense. And overall, we see power and efficiency improvements with this year's launch. When it comes to the physical design, it again launched in two different sizes, 11-inch and then the 13-inch. I personally went with the 11-inch because for me, it just seems more natural. It's like the size of a regular notebook. And when you travel, it fits on pretty much all of the tray tables on pretty much every airline. Oh yeah, and Apple also mentioned that this is the thinnest iPad that they have ever made. With all of these changes, we also got an update to the Pencil, so Apple Pencil Pro, as well as a new updated Magic Keyboard. In this video, I'm going to share my updates on how this iPad has held up since I've owned it for the last 99 days. Upon unboxing the iPad, I was greeted with premium quality, nothing less than Apple standard. It's the exact same iPad quality that we've grown to love over the years. And then I picked it up. It's crazy how light this thing is. I'm not gonna lie, when I first picked it up, my mind went immediately to Bengate. You guys remember that, right? But again, I've had zero issues. It's been a really solid iPad to date. As far as accessories, one of the things that I did add is a glass screen protector. I love the display. I didn't want to change it. But I also know with that OLED, I didn't want to risk any chances of getting that thing scratched. I use this thing daily. It goes in and out of a book bag, as well as I've traveled with it, and I've had zero issues so far. Another big design change for this year is the front-facing camera. Now, I've never been a big use the camera on the iPad guy. Actually, let me grab it. All right. So I've never been a big use the camera on the iPad because I just feel that this is just not a natural form factor. I don't feel like I want to grab this and just take a bunch of pictures. As far as the front camera goes, it's been relocated to the front. You can see that there, which I do feel like is just a more natural position. For a lot of people that are most likely going to use the iPad for the camera, they're probably using more or less that front-facing camera, and they're using it for things such as FaceTime, Zoom calls, or Microsoft Teams call. So to me, just the iPad being in that landscape orientation with the camera there, it just makes a lot more sense. Good move, Apple. So one of the things I was the most excited about with this iPad was indeed the display. I'm not a big game on my iPad person, but I use it a ton for productivity. And more recently with travel, I've been using it to help with my content creation. So for me, I was very excited about this OLED display and color accuracy of this iPad. For those that may not be familiar, OLED displays are made of special components that allow the materials in the display to be able to create their own light. Previous displays needed multiple layers in the display to produce the same amount of light. This is key in how Apple was able to get this iPad so much thinner. For my use case, the display has been perfect. I can really see the difference in color accuracy, as well as the display performs in all kinds of lighting conditions, from extremely dark to extremely bright. And that used to be a little bit of a challenge with previous displays. Okay, now we're gonna talk performance. And this thing is an extremely powerful device. Apple's new M4 chip is extremely powerful, and most people are nowhere close to pushing this thing to its limits. With that being said, my day-to-day use isn't overly taxing for this device. I mainly use my iPad for productivity, so I'm using it to take notes, plan out content, looking at my calendar, doing research, reading articles, and more recently, doing some video editing. It's done a great job in handling all these tasks. So for me, the one thing that I use the iPad for that would most likely cause it to slow down just a little bit would be video editing. I will say to date, I've edited a handful of videos on this thing at the same time, been multitasking in the background. I've noticed zero performance issues. This gives me a lot of confidence that this device should hold up for a while. The one thing that I will say with video editing is I did notice that the battery does die a lot fast. Other than that, I feel the battery life is pretty much the same as my previous iPad, which was an 11-inch iPad Pro 4th generation. And for me, for the other apps that I use, it's pretty much held up the same. I know I'm not an iPad power user, and I'm not one of those people that is trying to use their iPad to replace their laptop. I have multiple devices, and I truly believe the iPad has a very specific purpose, and I'm using it to increase my flexibility and productivity on the go. Now, one thing that I have noticed is performance is a little bit better with this iPad when you're multitasking. I felt my previous iPad was just beginning to start to struggle with multitasking. When you have a lot of browsers open, you might have a lot of things running in the background. It was starting to slow down just a little bit. I've seen zero issues with this iPad when it comes to multitasking. Before we move on to accessories, if you're getting value out of this video, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Really helps me stay motivated to keep pumping out content for you all. Okay, now it's time to talk accessories, and naturally I had to get the new Apple Pencil Pro, as well as the new Magic Keyboard. Let's start with the Apple Pencil Pro. Compared to the previous generation, no major updates when it comes to the design change of the overall pencil. As far as features wise, this one does have some minor updates. Now we get Find My support, barrel roll, and the ability to squeeze the pencil. So far I haven't used the barrel roll, nor have I needed to use the Find My feature. With my previous pencil, there were times where I misplaced it, and I thought to myself, man, it would be nice if this did have Find My support. So even though I haven't used it yet, I'm sure that time's coming. All right, now let's talk about the squeeze feature. So for me, the best use case for the squeeze feature is when it comes to editing with Final Cut Pro. So before, we used to just have double tap and you were limited into what you could do. You could toggle between devices as far as pencil or eraser, or you could toggle between kind of like your last used tools. Now with squeeze, you just simply squeeze the pencil and pretty much all the tools come up at one time. So you could select which tool you need at that moment. Overall, just increasing your workflow and making things that much easier. Good job with this one, Apple. All right, now we get into this way overpriced keyboard. All right. Quality wise, I do think this keyboard is pretty much on par with the previous generation. I do love the larger trackpad, and I love the function row at the top of the keyboard. I will say if you have larger hands, you'll have to have the iPad tilted all the way back in order for you to have access to that function row. But again, I do love the fact that it's there. I think this really speeds up my workflow when I'm using my iPad. Now I'm going to talk about what I don't like with this updated Magic Keyboard. You can sometimes introduce a very slight wobble when you have the iPad connected to the keyboard and you have to push on the screen. Now I admit, you do have to press a little bit harder for this to happen, but it is there and you can get the iPad off balance. Is it a deal breaker? Absolutely not. This can be annoying if you're working on your iPad in a tight space, like working on an airplane, and it keeps rocking on you. I'll insert some clips of the differences in the designs between the two keyboards so you can see kind of what might be introducing the wobble with this latest generation. All right, hit me up in the comments so we can discuss more how this new M4 iPad could be the right iPad for you, or if there's anything in particular you want me to deep dive regarding this new iPad.